To Richard and to Ron, I want you to know a little bit about our community. You have been briefed well and you've done your homework. But I want everyone else to know about us. There was a huge headline today, a lot for us to be thoughtful about and thankful about in terms of nanoscale technology and its development and the certainty of its development in our community. It's also been a welcoming community to diverse peoples. And we all appreciate that. And so today in the Utica Public Schools, 43 different languages are spoken, and children go to school K through 12 every day without incident. It's a magnificent story. It's a very nice place. To all of you, it is really an honor to have Richard here. He not only is a best-selling author of several books dealing with the creative class, but he created the concept of the creative class and created the concept of nurturing national and global economies by nurturing regions. He is sought after places all over the world. At one point, I was putting on a program in London for IBM, and I said, I think I can get Richard Florida. Richard Florida. That was pretty good. That was IBM, and that was London. So it's a tribute to us here, all of us here and beyond in this community, that Richard has come here, and it's a perfect time for it. This community's had some hard times. It's bottomed out. It is clearly on the way up. There's a new attitude, a new spirit. And this is the perfect time for someone to put all of that together and explain to us how we tell our story and further this great development. And so, Richard, you're the guy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Well, thank you all so much for that kind introduction. Thank you, John, for your kind words about myself and my wife, Rana. Happy birthday to the Stanley Theater, 85 years old. How remarkable is that? You really feel it. I was talking backstage to the guys, miking me up and telling them how if you really want to understand me, I'm just a frustrated rock and roll guitar player. But how much being in a theater like this means to you if you're a performer. And that's obviously for a musician or a theatrical performer, but I think it goes 3 or 4 times more for a speaker, because you don't have your bandmates and your castmates out here. You just have this great history and authenticity in all of you. So you're so blessed to have such a marvelous place, and thank you so much for allowing me to be part of it. Wow, what an announcement today. Could it, well, I heard it's sort of a pre-announcement or a kind of announcement, but I was like, was this time for my talk here? What a wonderful thing for the community. What an amazing thing for this kind of future-oriented nanoscale technology at the SUNY IT with these great companies like Intel and Samsung and IBM and all the rest. And the scale of investment is truly mind-boggling when I see numbers with billions, 10 billions and 15 billions and 45 billions. And clearly, driving around today and coming in and seeing the vendors outside and talking to folks, you get a sense of the remarkable transformation that is taking place here. And I know this region pretty well. I've been here a lot. Rana and I live in Toronto. That's not that far, and I'll talk about the mega region. It's not that far from here. But one little kind of poorly kept secret is that my first professorship, which if I say the year is going to give away my age, in 1981 was not too far from here. In fact, I drove through the town today. It was in the Department of Urban Planning at the University of Buffalo. So I spent a year in Buffalo, well during the really difficult times of the early 1980s, and got to know, drove around, traveled around, got to know this entire region, this entire part of this great state really pretty well. And the other thing I just want to say is thanks to everyone. I've never seen such incredible community-wide spirit for any event. I've done thousands of events. When I looked at the Twitter and the internet and the Facebook and the level of people talking about this and and responded to the reporters. Today, backstage, I was looking for John's article and I put in Richard, Florida and Utica, and I got like 100. And that is really a testimony not to me, it's really to the community understanding how important the stewardship, the personal investment, your involvement, civic involvement on the part of the entire region. So, I'm not the first to tell you, I'm not going to be the last to tell you, we are going through the greatest economic transformation in human history. I mean, look at this week. It's the anniversary of the tragic events of 9/11. I watched those towers as a boy growing up in North Arlington, New Jersey, across the Hudson River, and I watched those towers be built. It's the 50th anniversary of the horrific economic and financial collapse. We are living through something really disruptive, and we all have to come to grips with that. It is a transformation that once gives us many opportunities. It once enables us to build and rebuild and revitalize our communities, but it's been terribly disruptive. My dad used to talk to me about the Great Depression and economic change, and, I thought it was all historical lore, but, we've lived through something, and I wrote a book about this called The Great Reset. We've lived through something that epical. Looking back in history, only really the Great Depression of the 1930s and the Panic and Long Depression of the 1870s, 80s, and 90s are something similar to this. We are witnessing an epical shift in the nature of our economy, and it's reverberating through our culture, through our society, obviously through our politics, and it's affecting all of us in our personal lives, in our family lives, in our businesses, in our careers, and in our communities. I want to try to give you some touchstones to help understand as you have navigated through this, because places like Utica and Rome, the Mohawk Valley, this part of upstate New York, where I lived for many years, Pittsburgh. My wife is from Detroit. I grew up in Newark, New Jersey. Places that have felt this transformation very deeply for the better part of a generation. I want to give you some touchstones to navigate this. But, when I look at this, what makes today's economic transformation, think about it. Think about the Depression. I think about my grandparents' and parents' stories. I think about the middle of the 19th century, how incredibly disruptive those times were. We fought 2 massive world wars. Geopolitics were reorganized. We saw the birth of great cities like this one, Buffalo, Cleveland, Detroit, Pittsburgh, in the latter part of the 19th century. We saw the expansion of the suburbs. We saw all of these new inventions. And I will submit to you that this transformation we are all living through is bigger than all of those combined, even though it doesn't feel that way because we live in a more advanced and affluent society. For all of human history, if you think about this, all of human history, we created wealth in a very simple fashion. It's how this region was born. We were lucky enough as human beings, first we were hunter-gatherers, nomadic peoples, we began to settle and build communities around river valleys and natural port facilities, lakefronts, riverfronts, natural harbors, and we began to till the land. And for most of the time we've been on this earth, that's the way we supported ourselves. By making use of land and natural harbors, and hunting and fishing, and beginning to do agriculture and farming, by harnessing our natural assets. And then came the great industrial revolution. this is what Adam Smith wrote about. All of the great classical economists, Adam Smith, David Ricardo, John Stuart Mill, and of course, Karl Marx. Talking about this great industrial revolution as human beings began to harness these natural assets and raw materials and natural resources, and that led to the incredible boom in this part of the world. Well, beginning with the Great Erie Canal, and then with the rise of textile production, steam power, iron and coal, steel in Pittsburgh, city I lived in for nearly 20 years. But basically, we still had a very similar formula. We were combining physical assets, raw materials, with the backs and brawns and legs and strengths of the great industrial working class. Economists had a simple formula they taught me in school. They said, economic growth is dependent upon this simple logic of combining the great factors of production: land, labor, and capital. Well, we all know this. A kid from Newark whose dad was a factory worker knows this. Someone from Pittsburgh knows this. Someone from Detroit knows this. Someone from Utica knows this. Someone from Buffalo or Cleveland knows this. The world changed, and it was very disruptive. My professors called it de-industrialization. Beginning probably even before I was born, beginning in the 1950s and in the 1960s, but really coming to a head in the 70s and 80s and 90s, other countries began to get good at making things. We began to become more automated. We introduced robots. We began to experiment with new kinds of production methodologies: lean production, high-performance manufacturing, the quality movement. And over time, a society, not just an economy, that was built on manufacturing, first farming and then manufacturing, that was built on strength and raw materials and physical resources, began to give way. And it was tragic. I watched the factory where my dad worked his entire life shutter, putting thousands of men out of work. And over the past couple of decades, 3 or maybe as many as 3 or 4 decades, our economy began to change. And that's what my research, that's what my studies have tried to zero in on. And over the past, decade or two, I've written a lot on this, and 4 or 5 books, countless studies working. And I promise I will not, if you have my books, if you're fortunate enough to have them, if you put them on your bedside table, it's the best month of sleeping you will ever have. So I will not recite fact and verse and figure of what's in those books, but I'll give you the highlights. But here's what happened. People started to speculate that our economy was going to change during this great disruption. And this is what the financial and economic crash really represents. It represents not just a banking system run amok or credit derivatives or new financial instruments. It represents the tectonic shift from the older economic and social order to a new one, not yet defined, still emergent, hard to wrap your hands around, but emerging right in our very midst. So people I admired talked about this. We were shifting, they said, from a manufacturing to a service economy, from an industrial to an innovation economy, from an old economy to a new economy, from industrial to post-industrial. And then the great Peter Drucker, one of 2 or 3 of my intellectual idols, migrant to this country from Vienna. He as early as the 1950s, by the way, in a study of General Motors that he began in the late 1950s, said that what was happening in America and around the world is that we were shifting from an industrial economy powered by people using physical labor to make things to a knowledge economy where the human mind has become the means of production. Well, in my view, Drucker got it just about right. But when I was reflecting on his work and other ideas about the kind of economic transformation we were living through, something dawned on me, which I hope you find interesting, or I hope you find helps you understand the world we live in. You see, when those great economists were writing about the old farm economy, agricultural economy, industrial economy, they were not only writing about what made ourselves productive, they were writing about what made us human. And Adam Smith and Karl Marx, as much as they may have disagreed about something, said what made people human is that we work to transform nature. We use our physical attributes, our hands and our legs and our strength and our skill. That's what differentiates and makes human beings different. Well, it's not the knowledge that's poured into our heads that differentiates us from other species. It's not the technologies we create. It's not the innovations we produce. It's not the services we sell. In fact, there's something much more simply human about us than even our physical labor. And that's where I think my idea is helpful. If you take any little boy or girl and you watch them playing in a sandbox or on a playground, in their preschool class or in their kindergarten class, you watch teenagers forming their little groups and tribes, whether it's in sports or filmmaking or in a rock and roll band like I did. You know, you think about what makes a great entrepreneur, what that great entrepreneur has in common with a great business leader, a great political leader, a great technologist, a great musician. You know, what is it that Pablo Picasso and Jimi Hendrix and Steve Jobs, and I could go on, Warren Buffett, all share? It's something that all of us share, isn't it? The thing that makes us human isn't that we produce things with our hands and our backs and our brawn. That was a distraction from the past. The thing that really makes us human, the thing that we all share, the thing that we see in all of our children and grandchildren, is our creativity. You see, at the end of the day, that's the factor of production. That's the motivating force of life. And that's what I tried to put my finger on. So I documented in our lives, in my life, over the course of the past century, the rise in fits and starts of this new kind of creative economy. And let me just give you a few simple statistics on how big this shift is. If you scroll back the historical clock about a century, when this part of the world was really starting to boom, you know, we were still, I know it's hard to imagine, we were still in America, even here, Pittsburgh and Detroit, never mind Silicon Valley, we were still an agrarian nation. In the year 1900, 50% or more of our people worked in or around farm communities. A growing number of us were taking up work in blue-collar manufacturing. Less than 5% of all Americans, were paid to use their creativity at work. We're members of what I have come to call the creative class. Scientists, technologists, innovators, entrepreneurs, people who work in media, in arts and culture, design, people who work in business, management, healthcare, and the law. By the year 1950, we had shifted. We had gone through the first great disruption. The percentage of our workforce employed in agriculture shrunk to less than 10% in just that 5-decade period. Now, the majority of Americans worked in those booming blue-collar steel and automotive and electronic and chemical factories, the things that won us 2 great world wars. Less than 10% of us were paid to use our creativity by working in the creative class. You could see the dawn of the creative economy. I watched it unfold over my own life course. I watched what happened in the 60s. The outpouring of people as they felt stultified and squelched by the rigors of the older organization man society. The outpouring of energy in the women's movement, the Black and African American movement, the student movement, the change in our culture, the rise of a popular culture. But as I said in my book, it wasn't Woodstock that signaled the rise. It wasn't our culture and our lifestyle and our music. It was the change in the way we work, the change in the factor of production. Between 1980 and today, even with one of the greatest crises in world history, the United States added 20 million new jobs in the creative sector of the economy. That's science, technology, innovation, entrepreneurship, arts, culture, media, design, entertainment, management, business, law, healthcare, and education. At the same time that we have tragically lost millions of manufacturing jobs, that has fortunately stabilized. Finally, in our country, we have stabilized that. We will generate another 10 million jobs in the creative sector of the economy moving forward. While the rate of unemployment overall in the United States surged past 10%, while the rate of unemployment in construction surged past 25%, while the rate of unemployment in manufacturing topped 20%, the rate of unemployment in the creative class during the crisis never topped 5%. Today, more than a third of our workforce are members of the creative class. Agriculture has dropped to less than 1% of our workforce, and blue-collar work, including manufacturing, construction, installation, maintenance, and transportation, employs just 1 in 5 Americans. If you take direct production, the people who actually touch things in factories, it's 6% of our workforce, about the same percentage as agriculture was when we were coming out of World War II. Like it or not, we are in a wholly new kind of economy where creativity, no longer physical labor and raw materials, while they're important, and we still make agriculture with 1% of our workforce, and we still make more factory goods with 6% of our workforce than we did before, but a new factor of production has entered into the equation. And it's not one that any person has an exclusive hold on. Every single human being is creative. John noted tolerance. Creativity requires diversity. This is not an afterthought or a nicety or a moral imperative. Diversity and tolerance are an economic imperative. 50% of those Silicon Valley high-tech businesses, those entrepreneurial startups that everyone across the world wants to emulate, were founded by someone who was not born in America. That's America's great secret. It's not that Americans are any smarter than anyone else. It's not that our market's bigger than anyone else. It's not that we have great God-given resources. We do. It's that we figured out the secret is to import bright, ambitious, and talented people. Some who come with PhD in software engineering and biotech degrees to our great universities, the SUNY Systems, the Stanfords, the Carnegie Mellons. Some who came like my grandparents with not one day of formal education, who create this great melting pot. Creativity will not be bound, cannot be bound by the social categories of race, gender, ethnicity, nationality, sexual orientation we have imposed on ourselves. Creativity is greatest when we are in areas of difference and diversity. Creativity, the psychologists tell us, flow from cognitive diversity, different thinking styles which are directly related to demographic diversity. Now, people hear me talk about creativity in the creative class, and some people, particularly people who look like me, we'll call them middle-aged white men. Some of these people who have been in positions of influence will say, some of my dear friends, they hear this thing about the creative class and they kind of go bonkers. And so they immediately hear it and they say, oh my God, Florida's lost his marbles. He's a crazy person. You know, what he's saying now is that the way you build your economy is you set up like 3 little street corner busking stations and you get people out there to play guitar, and then you set up like 4 latte bars over here, and that's, he's telling you, you're going to build Utica by having yuppies, sophistos, the guy said this, yuppies, sophistos, trendoids, and gays. No, that won't work. A person actually wrote that about me. And another fellow said, middle-aged white man, said, of which I am one, a group I am a member of, through no choice of my own, but that's another story. My mother's fault. Father, too. Another one said, Florida, he not only had that bohemian factor. I was trying to figure out places that had a vibrant scene, that had a vibrant creative edge, and how that related to economic growth. He's the crazy one. He came up with this wacky thing called the gay index. And so he's going to tell you that in order to make Utica better and your towns better, the greater region better, you're going to have to import a whole bunch of gay people. And when you import a whole bunch of gay people, then you're going to have to bloom. I'm like, what? And then the one said, they said, I know, my wife's here to prove it. He's trying to foist his gay agenda on all of you. But the best was Catholic school, Queen of Peace, boys' high school. We were the Queen's men, baby. Baby. Richard Florida is here. His agenda is to undermine the American family and the Judeo-Christian civilization which underpins it. I can just see the Sisters of St. Joseph having a coronary. Look, I'm here to tell you, you don't have to read the books. I figured this out by studying factories. For most of my career, I didn't study cities. I studied factories. I wanted to understand what was happening to America's economic might with the rise of Asia, the BRICS economy, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, the new competitors. And I did massive projects, both at Ohio State and Carnegie Mellon. I traveled the whole Rust Belt. I visited hundreds of factories throughout the United States, throughout Canada, throughout Europe, throughout Japan. I wrote 3 books on this. Trust me, no one ever bought them, but that's neither here nor there. What I concluded, well, I went to this factory in Japan on the outskirts of Nagoya one day, and I was interviewing the plant manager, and he said to me something that I'll never forget. He said, Professor Florida, this was in about 1985, he said, we're going to win. And he said, the reason we're going to win has nothing to do, you have a great country, it's a big country, you have natural resources, you have great workers. The reason we're going to win is because you don't know how to manage. Your management system is wrong. He said, you think the key to success is to have a great CEO, business leader. If you have this great CEO and you have great research engineers and research scientists and you have great business people, and I teach at a business school, he said, you believe that that's going to keep you successful. He said, we know better. The reason we're going to win in the car business is because we recognize that every one of our workers is a source of innovation. The people who work on our factory floors, and he showed me what they innovated, how they made these incredible processes. He said, these people, when they work in groups and teams, they are the source of Kaizen, continuous process improvement. We're going to empower them in our supply chain, and we're going to have thousands of innovators, and nothing can beat that. Well, and then I'll tell you where I heard it first. I learned it from my father. My dad's name was Louis Florida. He was born in 1921 in Newark, New Jersey, the son of my grandparents, who migrated from Italy. My dad got to about the 7th grade. The markets collapsed in 1929. He was 8. And by 1934, things were pretty bleak. My dad turned 13, and he could get his working papers. So on the day he turned 13 in December 8th, 1934, put his books down on his desk, and he asked his teacher if he could be excused, and he went down in Newark and got his working papers. He went to work in an eyeglass factory, Victory Optical, made frames just like these. In fact, these frames are called Ramblers. They're made by a very highfalutin company in Utica. But Rambler was the frame I wore as a boy. I'm like my dad, I'm farsighted, so I had to get glasses. At 2 years old, I wore these Rambler frames, and when I saw them, I had to have them because they remind me of the frames I wore as a boy. My dad worked in that plant until the day Pearl Harbor was attacked. And he put his tools down on his workbench, and he went off and he enlisted in the U.S. Army. Stormed the beaches at Normandy, fought in all the great battles of World War II, and came back from the war and went right back to work, guess where? Victory Optical, ironbound section in Newark, down neck. And he worked there. He met my mom. They got married, had 2 boys, in the great melting pot society that is America. They gave us great Italian names, Richard and Robert. They would not speak Italian in the house. We had to fit in, go to Catholic school, get good marks, achieve upward mobility. And they drummed that into us. And I was an inquisitive little kid. I wanted to see where my dad worked. You know, he got up, he got dressed every morning, he got in his Chevy Impala, and he drove off. I wanted to see where he was going. And I would beg my dad, Dad, can you take me to work? And remember, back in the 1960s, there was no such thing as like take your son or daughter to work day. It's just ludicrous. The kid would go to a factory, but trust me, I would throw a temper tantrum. And finally, my dad was really smart. On Saturdays when the plant was running overtime, he would relent. And I'd join him, and it was only a half day. And we'd drive. And I don't know how many of you know New Jersey, the Garden State. It really is a garden. Don't you think of, when you think of a garden, don't you think of the great state of New Jersey, my state? Home of, well, whatever. We would take that drive, and the only way to explain it, if you don't know the Pulaski Skyway, is it was kind of part Sopranos and part Jersey Shore, mixed into one. So you know, when I would do on those streets, you either would see Jim Gandolfini, Tony Soprano, or Snooki. One or the other would be on my hometown street. And I talk like this, how you doing? It's nice, John, how you doing? Beautiful, beautiful what you're doing with the theater. I bet Sinatra played here once. I swear I got a scholarship to Rutgers College where I learned English as a second language. Changed my life. But you know what? My dad would finally relent. We'd go in that factory. You know, it was this giant brick building in the center of Newark's industrial district. My dad knew enough Italian. Of course, he could speak Italian. He picked up Spanish, could talk Spanish to the Puerto Rican, talk German to the machine tool. I mean, and I would enter that factory, and I would just see the machines, the plastic injection machines making the plastic frames, the plating machines plating the gold, metal, and silver-rimmed frames. My dad would see me looking at these machines, and here's what he said to me. My dad said this first. I've since heard it from at least a dozen great CEOs that I've gotten the good fortune to meet. My dad told me this first. He said, Rich, it's not the machines that make the factory great. These machines you could get anywhere. Some come from Italy, some come from Germany, some come from the United States. Most of them are old. The thing that makes this factory great is the knowledge, the intelligence, and the creativity of the people who work here. That's our challenge. In economic development, in community development, in building a great community, that's our challenge. How do we dig deep? How do we dig deep and harness the creativity in every single one of us? And here's the opportunity here and the opportunity worldwide. In contrast to those raw materials and natural resources, which are zero-sum and we will run out of, creativity is the only limitless resource we have. We build on the past, we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us, and we build off each other's creativity. That's why creativity occurs not through individual genius, but through communities of people. That's why cities and communities matter. Not because they're near waterways, not because they're near natural resources, because they bring people together who share. That's what an artistic scene is. That's what a Silicon Valley is. That's what a music scene is. That's what a great city is. It's people sharing and using, competing and collaborating to charge our creativity. We meet, we mingle through serendipitous interactions. We see somebody else, we copy them, we compete with them. We go for it. That's the key, with one proviso. 30% of us in this great state of New York, 2.5 million people. In this region, 36,000 of us have the great good fortune, like almost every one of us here, to use our creativity at work, to be members of the creative class. That means 66% of us stand outside. Look at what's happened with inequality in our country. Look at what's happened with our country splitting apart, the haves and the have-nots. We in leadership, those of us who are blessed to be able to participate in the creative class, have to extend a hand out and a hand up. That's the challenge as we move forward. To make sure, like in my father's factory, creativity can be used on the job, we can build creative manufacturing. To make sure, and we're doing it in agriculture, we can stimulate ever more creative agriculture, but there's a place we got to go. 66 million Americans work in the service industry. 52% of workers in this community work in the service industry. The fastest growing jobs of all. Fast food preparation and service, personal care, like the attendant who took care of my mom when she was dying of Alzheimer's. Retail sales, retail trade, office and clerical administration. Generate another 15 million of those jobs going forward. No wonder our society split between the creative class, who average 75,000 and many who make six figures, and the service class, most of whom make less than 25,000 and have to have 2 or 3 or 4 jobs to make ends meet. We have to creatify that service work. And the way I can put this best is to tell you what another thing my dad told me. He said, Rich, during the Depression, when I took that job as a 13-year-old, it took 9 of us to make a family wage. 9. It took your grandma, my grandma worked in a bakery, my granddad worked in a factory, my brother and his 6 siblings all worked to put food on the table. He said, Rich, when I came back from World War II, as if by magic, I and millions of other simple men like me had a great job. I could get married, I could buy my wife and myself a house. Your mom didn't have to work. She worked part-time when we got bigger. You boys could go to Catholic school. I could put you both through college. As if by magic. We turned manufacturing jobs from shitty jobs into good jobs. We made them good jobs. Don't let anyone ever tell you different. On the backs of the union movement, on the backs of progressive managers, on the backs of great political leaders, we turned jobs that Karl Marx said were going to lead to the overthrow of capitalism, which William Blake said will work in satanic mills. We turned them into good, high-paying jobs that we long for today. Look, we have a decision to make in society. Do we want to continue to treat 66% of our population like serfs, downtrodden, or do we want to lift them up? A hand out and a hand up. It's an easy calculation for me. Who's more important for me? Who would I rather pay more? The guy who makes my eyeglasses in a factory? The fellows who build my car offshore, or the woman who takes care of my mom when she has Alzheimer's, the people who take care of Ron and I's home, the people who provide daycare education for our nieces and nephews. This is a social no-brainer. So our agenda going forward has to be that we creatify everything. This isn't the creative haves versus the have-nots. It's the creatification of an entire system. That's the way we solve this problem. And that's what my next book's going to be about. No, I'm going to write a book about it because it's so darn important and so many people refuse to talk about it. They just say workers in Walmart or McDonald's or in service jobs or in moms and pops, they're not important. They're all we got. Well, it leads into a second point, which is, I think, the real reason we're here. If this is the backdrop, if creativity is the driver, if creativity comes in all of us, we have to harness creativity through diversity. As we, as stewards of communities and the advantaged folks, the city builders, the community builders, community leaders, if we've got to start a dialogue about expanding creativity and rewarding creativity wherever it is, there's a reason why our cities and communities are important. There's a reason why we're having this conversation about the future of Utica, the greater Utica region and surrounding communities. The Industrial Corporation was the central economic organizing unit of my parents' and grandparents' age. What's good for General Motors, John Kennedy told us, was good for America. We had strong companies, we had a strong country. And you know, when you look at the knowledge economy, the creative economy, it's kind of difficult to see this because most people who look at this see technology and the internet and fast planes and advanced transportation and Facebook and Google and FaceTime and all of this, and they say, oh, this technology has made place less important. Globalization has meant the conquering of geography, the economist wrote, a cover, the death of distance. We have overcome community. Or as the great Tom Friedman told us, the world is flat. When the world is flat, where we live is no longer important because we can plug and play from anywhere. Well, that may be true for certain things like simple call center work or standard manufacturing, which can be offshored. But for many things, including the most creative things and the services that we consume, place has become more important than ever. In fact, I will submit to you, the reason we're here today is because place, community, location, city, whatever noun you want to use to describe that, has replaced the corporation as the central economic and social organizing unit of our time. I wrote a book about this, Who's Your City? I said, my mom told me, Richard, pick the right girl to get married, and he gave me all advice about how the person I married. My father told me, Richard, study hard, get a good job and a career. That'll be the thing. The thing nobody ever told me, that the place I live is the most important decision in my life. Where I work, how my career is going, who I marry, education for children, it's all organized in place. My dad worked for one company for his entire life. The average American now changes a job every 3 years. The average young American under the age of 35 changes a job every 1 year. What puts labor and capital, talent and business together? Place. Place is the container of our time, and the person who figured this out isn't me. It's my second great intellectual idol. It's the great Jane Jacobs, a lady who hailed from Scranton, moved to New York City, and decided to write a book in 1961. I got to know Jane. She moved to Toronto. I got to know her when she was in her middle 80s before she died. And I asked her, I said, Jane, what do you think was your most important thing you've discovered? She said, it's not something people talk about that much when they talk about me. She said, I think I figured out where economic growth and development comes from. She said, most economists believe economic growth and development comes from companies. Companies who discover new products, companies who create a division of labor, companies who create an assembly line, companies who discover iPhones. She said, what companies do really well is an occasional innovation, but they really make things more efficient and effective. She said, when you really look at it, if you want to discover where new things come from, new jobs are created, new work emerges, new industries stem from, they don't come from companies. They come from people living in cities. When people asked Steve Jobs while he was successful, he had the same answer as any number of musicians when asked what makes a thriving music scene. Jack White of the White Stripes, our great American rock guitarist and composer. What makes Detroit a great music scene? He said the same thing that Steve Jobs said about Silicon Valley. When people are part of a community, they listen and they learn and they watch and they take from one another. We increase each other's innovativeness. We multiply each other's productivity. It's our community that's the basic factor of creative production. Well, that's what I spent the past decade of my life trying to unpack. And that's what each of you are doing, all of us are doing in our own ways in our communities. And there's not a textbook for it because it's new. Because we've only begun to understand this in the past decade, because this new economic system has only been around for less than a generation. We haven't codified it, but we will. We'll get there. We're beginning to understand what it is. So what I've tried to do is break down some of its key attributes. And John put it nicely in his such kind words. The first way I cut at this, in the early 2000s, which is a simple formula, I called it the 3 T's. Now, the reason I called it the 3 T's, you have to bear with me on this, because my mother, who is an education mother, it's not the Asian education mother, really. It's not the Jewish education mother, trust me. It's the Italian education mother I had to grow up with. So my mother would always say, Richard, you have to study harder. You have to do better in school. The nuns are going to get mad at you. You have to learn your 3 R's. Remember the 3 R's? Reading, writing, and arithmetic. At least I picked 3 T's that actually have T's in them. So what I said in writing that book is I have to tell this story in a way my mom and dad could understand it. 3 R's, 3 T's. The 3 T's of economic development. And this is the way you begin to really wrap your arms around your town, in your community. Most places, and I'll bet it's true here, it certainly has been true in every community I live in, like to go at their strength. They'll find a T that they're good in, and they'll ignore the other 2. The best communities do all 3. So the 3 T's are technology, talent, and tolerance. The first T, everybody agrees with. Technology is understood to be a key driver of regional growth and development. That if you have technology, a Stanford University, an MIT, a great cluster of companies, wealth will come. But here's the rub. I was living in Pittsburgh, and this is what woke me up. You see, Pittsburgh at the time had as much technology as Silicon Valley. Carnegie Mellon, where I taught, was as good as Stanford or MIT. Pittsburgh, if you remember, was home to Westinghouse and U.S. Steel and Gulf Oil and Rockwell International Aerospace and Pittsburgh Plate Glass. It had one of the largest concentrations of scientists and engineers on the planet. But they were leaving. Not because there weren't good jobs, there were. They were leaving because they felt Pittsburgh wasn't really a place they resonated with. I asked my students at Carnegie Mellon, how many of you, this was back in the late 90s, would want to stay in Pittsburgh? And literally at that time, now things have changed immensely, no hands went up. Our kids were going to Apple and Microsoft and Intel. My faculty colleagues were founding the best, most high-tech companies in the country. We had the research director at Apple, the research director at Microsoft, the founders of Sun. I can go on and on and on and on. And then one day I saw one of our great startup companies leave town. And I said there had to be other parts of the equation. This great city of Pittsburgh was missing. Talent. Talent. Talent is the second T. It is not just technology. Technology comes from people. Talent is the second key factor of production, the second key T. The creative class. The number of people in colleges and universities. You're blessed. 8 colleges, community colleges and universities. Talent machines. The kinds of places, and I've always thought of the universities and colleges as the Ellis Islands of our time, attracting new people and new immigrants to our community. They are a business attraction and retention, a talent attraction and retention opportunity. Every single one of the young people we develop. I said at that time, Pittsburgh's great export wasn't steel. It was the talent it was producing that was leaving. And so many of us in this part of the world, we bleed our skilled talent. But that led me to the third T, tolerance. John mentioned it. You see, in many ways, tolerance is a key. And tolerance is the ability to reach out and attract talented and creative people, regardless of ethnicity, race, nationality. A tolerant community, an open-minded community, and what I call a proactively inclusive community is the third key economic factor. I look at this great state of New York, and I look at its scores. You know, this great state of New York scores 15th on technology. It scores 9th in talent, but if you look at the melting pot that is this great state of New York, 3rd on tolerance. That's the kind of thing that you see in Massachusetts, the kind of thing you see in California. It's the kind of thing that drives our economy. John's own analysis of this community, you know, looking at the 15,000 refugees, the 43 languages, nationalities you've absorbed, and even more when you count other new immigrant groups. And the incredible survey he did for the foundation, where he said 70% of this community believes immigration is working and is a good thing. And not just the young folks, 69% of those over 65 thought that immigration is a good thing. It wasn't a close the borders, you know, like so many of our communities, particularly in the South, to close off the borders, keep people out, they're going to take my job. What makes a community thrive is these 3 T's in combination. Now, in addition to working on your 3 T's, it's important that you understand your assets. When I look at this community, I see one asset that's bigger than any. I'll bet you many of you in this audience think your location is a disadvantage. It's cold in the winter, it's great today, we're in the Rust Belt, right? Oh my God, if we were just in Phoenix where it was sunny. Phoenix has been traumatized. It's a great town, but talk about a place that built it. I call them the cities in the sand, where they literally built their economies on moving real estate, sprawling and selling homes like a giant Ponzi. And again, Phoenix will figure it out. But one of the things we can know is that, in fact, climate and rain and sunshine days have very little to do with real economic development. If you look at some of the most dynamic communities in the United States and the world, there are places like Boston or Minneapolis, and you can go on and on. But that's not what I'm talking about when I talk about your location. When I talk about location, I talk about something called a mega region. When I talk about location, I'm not talking about a nation state anymore or even just a little town. I'm talking about what drives success in our day, in the future, is a concept of the mega region. If nation states and companies were the power centers of the old industrial economy, cities, communities, creative people, and mega regions are the power centers of our new economy. We looked at this. I'm a geek. We took the damn computer images of the satellite images of the world at night from the NASA damn NOAA satellites, and we coded them and put the data in, and we figured out what the world economy really looks like. There are 40 mega regions: Greater Tokyo, the New York, Boston, Washington corridor, Greater London, Greater Moscow. It's not Brazil that's our competitor. It's Sao Paulo to Rio. It's not China that's the economic power on the block. It's a mega region from Shanghai to Beijing. It's not India that's taking our jobs. It's the Mumbai-Bangalore corridor that matters. You are right in the middle of two of the biggest mega regions in world history. You're about a 3.5 to 4 hour drive from the center of the greatest mega region in history, the Boswash, New York region. 55 million people and $2.2 trillion in economic assets, the 5th largest country in the world. And you are actually part of the region. We share this. We are mega region brothers and sisters here, as John pointed out in his article, us in Toronto, in the Great Tor Buffchester mega region that stretches from Toronto to Montreal to Ottawa to Buffalo to Rochester, that encompasses this area. Another 22 million people and $500 billion in economic assets. This is one of the greatest economic locations in the world. But you're not going to prosper by being isolated. You're not going to prosper by just looking inward. What has been the key to economic renaissance, what helped to turn Pittsburgh around, but what is the key to moving forward is developing those linkages and connections within the mega region and becoming a part of it. You know, the best way to think about this is to think of all the little communities that were struggling outside of London. The Manchesters, the Birmingham, the Leeds, that are going through a renaissance. You think about all the communities, the older communities outside of New York, Jersey City. My brother lives in Hoboken. I was scared to go to Hoboken when I was a boy because they've tied themselves to this bigger construct of the mega region. And you are in the sweet spot of location. But that brings me to really the most important thing we want to talk about. It's a concept that I came to late in writing my book, Rise of the Creative Class. I now kind of call it the fourth T. It's really quality of place is what our real key asset is. In a global world where people can move anywhere, where we really can, you know, especially those of us who work in the creative, and we can pick, you know, and more people can telework and they can remote work. And I always use this experiment with my students. If you're a teleworker, where will you live? The quality of place becomes so important. You know, and it's not the generic things that matter. Here's what, you know, everybody looks at this and says, if we just have more of this generic stuff. I teach a class for NYU in Abu Dhabi. I have kids from all over the world. I have kids from the United States, from Latin America, from the Middle East, from Asia. And you know what? We all speak the same language. Fortunately for us, it's English. Fortunately, because we'd be dead in the water if it wasn't. We all dress the same. We all eat each other's foods. And my wife said this when we went to visit not only Abu Dhabi, but Shanghai. She said, we're in the center of historic Shanghai, and they're taking me to a Starbucks. I want to see Shanghai. You remember. One of the things that we are blessed with in this part of the world that I saw in Pittsburgh, that I saw in Buffalo, that you have here, is authenticity. It's realness. It's a heart and soul. It's the great, you know, the president of the NYU, I split my time between University of Toronto and NYU. The president of NYU, John Sexton, says, what makes NYU great, he calls it a locational endowment. It doesn't have money like Harvard or Stanford. This is a locational endowment. You can't build this. You can't replicate this. You can't make this today. You can't make that business district today. You can't make history. People are going to try. They're going to try to emulate it, and it never works. That's what Pittsburgh understood, that it could use, not tear I remember when they tore down the steel mills, and I was screaming, and they put up a mall. They paved Paradise and really did put up a parking lot, Joni Mitchell. But they got it. They made a couple of mistakes, but they got it. It was the South Side area, the old historical steelworker area. And it was the beautiful old neighborhoods with these spectacular homes and the old loft districts and the old railroads that they turned into trails for biking and hiking and making the water where you could go out on a kayak. They got it, and they understood quality of place. You see it happening in Detroit now, where my wife is from. For years, they wanted to urban renew and annihilate that downtown and knock the buildings out. Now this one man, Dan Gilbert, one man, he said, I can't afford to be out in the burbs anymore. My people are commuting from so far away, it's so expensive. They're having a skyscraper sale in downtown Detroit, and I'm buying. He said this. And he's putting tens and tens of millions into rebuilding. That ruin porn that you used to see, it's going away. Those buildings are being remade and rebuilt. It's the authenticity, the realness, your theater district, the waterfronts, what's happening here. My students said once, we just can't take any more Generica. In a fast-paced world where we can travel everywhere, we need something authentic. When you grow up in a place, you take it for granted. But when you're a newcomer, when you left mom and dad behind and your friends, like so many of us had, I've moved 20 times now. Ron and I, we seem like we're perpetually in motion. We gravitate to older neighborhoods, historic homes. We gravitate to communities with real shops. When I asked Jane Jacobs, that's what made a neighborhood great, real shops and people you could talk to, the characters on the street, she called them. That's what made quality of place. What's there? The building stock. The historical buildings, the stuff we have to preserve and stop destroying. But it's not just what's there, it's who's there. It's the mix of people, the street-level activity, the mix of human beings mingling, and then it's what's going on. The great people from the Project for Public Spaces, every great space needs to have 10 things programmed going on. When we were in Abu Dhabi, we saw some of the world's best infrastructure, some of the world's best streets and beach walks, but nobody there. Creating and programming this energy. Well, I worked with Gallup, another pollster. I worked with Gallup, not on political polls. I worked with Gallup to do a massive survey of where quality of place comes from. We surveyed over 65,000 Americans about what quality of place really means, what makes a great community. In fact, the Knight Foundation has it up on their website. It's called The Soul of the Community. And what we found resembles the great psychologist Maslow's hierarchy of needs, his great pyramid. At the bottom of the pyramid, you got to have safe streets. You got to have low crime. You got to have good jobs. All the stuff that people will tell you are the heart and soul and bread and butter of community and economic development. But that's not enough. As we get wealthier and more affluent, as we develop, people want more. And what we found is that there were 2 or 3 things that define true quality of place. I've hinted at them before, but let me spell them out. Diversity and open-mindedness and tolerance. A community that people believe that they, young and old, people who work in business and the arts, Hispanic, Latino, Asian, white, African American, rich and poor, entrepreneurial, regular workers, I could go on and on, able-bodied and disabled, where they felt the community was good for all, was good for each. The top characteristics of quality of place have to do with the real feel and nature of the community. More important than any others, green, ecologically sustainable, clean air and clean water. These were things that people across the spectrum, all income groups, all racial groups, the cultural and social mix? Is it the kind of place I can find things to do? I can meet people and make friends. I can engage. I can be out. Maybe this is the way of saying it. So many of us live in big homes. We're affluent. We have our own private backyard. Maybe we have a pool. Maybe we go out and see our friends and go to a party. The great public spaces, the great public parks that we do in older communities like this, the great public parks that make city life, the great bustling streets have calmed down. We've privatized so many of those functions that what people increasingly want in their life is places to engage. The average number of social contacts the average American has in their life is one. One. We are living atomized, anonymous, lonely lives. So quality of place really means being historic, being authentic, preserving what we have, preserving our neighborhoods, making sure we have walkability in those public spaces we can engage. Well, I want to end with one story. I can see time is running late. And trust me, I come from the Fidel Castro School of Public Speaking, so I could talk at you all night. But about 2 years ago, this young man, and I think this story is illustrative of the way real city building, real community building, what you're doing. I think this story is illustrative of what we can do and what individual effort can help make happen in our communities. This young Asian American man named Tony Shea called me up. And he said, "Rich, I've read your books and I have a project I'd like you to learn about and maybe be part of." He said, "I know you're going to think I'm nuts." He said, "Do you know who I am?" And of course I knew who he was. Tony Shea is the very successful young founder of a software company that was built by Microsoft. He's been profiled on 60 Minutes, and he's not the founder, as he always reminds me. Other people founded it, his friends founded it, but he came in to become CEO of Zappos, the great online shoe delivery service that he sold to Amazon for over $1 billion. And Tony's about 35. So he said, "You're going to think I'm nuts because I'm going to revive a city that ranks at the very bottom of your own indicators. If you took all the cities, the hard-pressed Rust Belt cities, the Sun Belt cities, if you found the one on the bottom of the list, it would be Las Vegas. And I'm not going to work on the Strip where the money is. What I've done, Rich, is I'm going to move my headquarters to the most burned-out, dilapidated neighborhood in Las Vegas, Fremont East." Go to his website. It's called the Downtown Project, downtownproject.com. He said, I've surveyed we've gone out there, Ron and I went out there, we ran roundtables, we met with the mayor, it was great. Oscar Goodman, he was a former mafia lawyer. I said, "You must know a bunch of my relatives from New Jersey." And indeed he did. He was one of the brainchilds behind the Mafia Museum. You should go see it sometime. You will see some of my relatives. What Tony did is he was out in the burbs in a place called Henderson. He had this traditional corporate campus, and it wasn't working. It wasn't only working because he couldn't get the teamwork and the innovation. And remember, Zappos jobs there's some good software jobs, and there's a lot of these service jobs I mentioned. What Tony did is said, "I'm going to take you, if you're a valet on the Strip or you're rolling dice and you've got a dead-end job, you didn't go to college, didn't go to high school maybe, I'm going to give you a career." He starts them off at $35K, and he gives them an internal promotion. And you should see the people covered in tattoo. They can dress. They can organize their workspace anywhere they want. The place looks just crazy when you go through it. And they're giving you tours, and they're throwing things, and there's little fake monkeys hanging from the walls. That's crazy. And they're shaving each other's heads and whatever they're doing. But he built a culture of what he called happiness. He wrote a book on this. It wasn't delivering shoes. It was delivering happiness. But what he found is he couldn't deliver happiness in this isolated, generic geography of nowhere. So the city hall went for sale, and he bought it. And if you went to Fremont East back in the day, if you've ever gone there, there's a couple of bars, a couple of old rundown casinos, the condos nobody ever bought during the crisis. And Tony went to work. He went to work and said, "I'm going to build a town. What you have here, already in place," he said, "I'm going to build it there. And instead of this big master plan blueprint from on high, with a little help from just independent people like us and a few others, I'm going to let my team do it." You see, that's what Jane Jacobs always says. The people have to rebuild. It can't be necessarily master plan. I'm going to have my people do it. I'm going to ask them what they want. And he, of course, thought they were 35-year-olds and they wanted bars and places to do shots and places to hang out and, cool apartments. They said, yeah, we like that, but some of us have kids. We want good on-site daycare. We want good parks. We want dog parks. We want places that we can ride bicycles safely. The younger people want to party. So he began to formulate a plan, $350 million investment fund. What he is doing is remarkable. He is building there a community with not only high-paying jobs and career paths for the service workers. He's building apartments, not only standalone apartments, but for young people, shareable apartment suites, where instead of having to rent an expensive house and buy a car, they can live close to work, reduce their expenses, and walk to work. He's building little sheds and places, containers out of these shipping containers, where people can make retail shops or coffee bars. He's making little places for startups. He's going to San Francisco, and he's shipping the people in and saying, come here to Las Vegas, be part of this. Recruiting not only businesses, recruiting people. He went to Tesla, and he bought 100 electric cars that his people can share, free of charge. You see, what he decided is it wasn't enough anymore to just build the company. It wasn't enough just to give people a better career path. That the key to success in our time, in his words, it wasn't enough to build a successful company. To be successful in our day and age, you have to build a successful community. That's what you're doing. That's what you have been doing. That's what I've watched you do. And that's why I'm so excited about what is happening in this town. Thank you for my opportunity to share my words. Thank you for this opportunity to be able to work with you. Your best days are ahead of you, and best of luck moving forward. Thank you.
Are we inspired? Richard, thank you.
Thank you, Peggy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Fabulous.
Thank you.
See you upstairs.
Thank you.